Welcome to Lunch with Books. Please turn off your cell phones if you have one. Next week, we start a 2-week examination of World War II anniversaries, beginning with the 80th anniversary of the Battle of the Midway. And we have Professor John Brobst, who is an associate in history at Ohio University. He teaches there about the British Empire, geopolitics, and naval history. And then on the 14th, D-Day Revisited with historian Jared Frederick, who's coming from Penn State Altoona and has a book called Dispatches of D-Day, People's History of Normandy Invasion. Today we have back with us our good friend Bonnie Thurston. She is a native of West Virginia, living near Wheeling. She earned her BA in English first honors from Bethany College and MA and PhD degrees from the University of Virginia. She's written or edited 23 theological books, contributed to reference works in New Testament, and taught at the university level for 30 years. Her poetry has been anthologized and frequently appears in periodicals. The author of 6 volumes of verse, Bonnie is, maybe 7 now, an avid reader, gardener and cook, and enjoys classical music and loves the West Virginia hills. And she's here with a new book today called Not Sonnets. And you can see on the screen the address for her Cinnamon Press books if you'd like to get in, and we'll put another one up later. Here's Bonnie Thurston.
We call that in southern West Virginia wetting your whistle. Thank you. I think that Sean and company are really brave to have 2 weeks of poetry, one right after the other. That's a good mark of our literary acumen here in the upper Ohio Valley. The plan for today is actually to focus on the new book, Not Sonnets. But I think in view of the losses of COVID and the shootings in Baltimore and in Texas, the war in Ukraine, I thought it might be not only appropriate, but maybe important to start with just a few topical poems. I have one on the Ukraine situation and one on the shooting in Texas, which I'm sure has just brought everything up for the Sandy Hook families and anybody who's been involved with that sort of thing. So I want to read a couple of poems that are topical, and then follow those with 3 poems about grief, because my conviction about mourning is if you don't mourn the loss, you can't heal from it. And if poets have any value, it might be, I think, to help us to face and articulate the hard things in life and to celebrate the joys of life. And I was actually reminded of something that May Sarton, a writer that was very popular in my youth, who unfortunately isn't very well known today, but in one of her journals she wrote, "This is what poetry can do: to make the unbearable bearable, and to release grief." So I suppose I'm reading because I was thinking about May Sarton. The first poem is called Baptism by Fire. It's about a village in Ukraine, and I read a little article in the New York Times about 3 weeks ago about a village that instead of having the Russians come in, they opened the dam and they flooded the village and they flooded all their fields. So they were in a way sort of destroying their livelihood, but they kept the soldiers from coming in, and they kept the soldiers from using that as a route to Kiev. So this is called Baptism by Fire. They knew the tanks were coming, anticipated the bombs. So they chose life, opened the dam's gates, released its waters to cover their fields, endanger precious crops, to flood their village, to prevent blood and pillage, to save themselves in Kiev. Staring into ruins, fiery face, they opened the floodgates of grace, and from the waters of destruction rose up, shining. Well, this is for those people and their courage, you know. This is a brand new poem. It's just sort of hot off the computer, and I'm not sure this is the final version, but it's kind of like reading a rough draft, you know. But here it is. It's called Juxtapositions, and I think you'll get it. Winter is past, not turtle doves, but song sparrows are heard in my land. The heirloom peonies about which I'd worried survived the Holocaust of the heedless old man whose rusty snowplow destroyed my lane, cut great gashes, exposed their roots, and tore my heart. But they survived. Yesterday morning, the last full day before summer holidays, an 18-year-old with an assault rifle invaded a school, shot 19 children and 2 teachers. They did not survive. So I offer the fragrant glory of petal pink and fuchsia full-blown blossoms at 21 crosses and to countless broken hearts. So that's the kind of thing that leads us to grief. And so I'm going to read 3 poems about grief, and then we'll shift to something I hope a little bit lighter. I just think it's wrong to ignore these things. It's just not the right thing to do. This is called The Eye of Despair. These 3 poems are from Forgotten Futures, which is a little chapbook that I wrote and won a prize in Wales, and that's how it got to be in print. The Eye of Despair. Sometimes the best you can do is to howl. When the wound is so deep, you know the hurt will never heal. When the world is so broken, a universe of prayer won't repair it. The best you can do is howl. Throw back your head, and I dare you howl like a banshee. Like a she-wolf, like the wild thing buried in your bones, and feel rising from deep, dark places with the primal power of your breath, a sliver of hope to hurl with the howl at the eye of despair. And this one is called How to Grieve. I really hate how-to poems and how-to magazines. I don't know why I wrote a poem like this, because I think that kind of thing is so unhelpful, but here's one anyway. How to grieve. Stare it in the mangled face. Do not turn away or accept facile destruction. Do not turn away or accept facile distraction. Do not allow words to be imposed on you, platitudes of hope dispensed like spiritual aspirin by those who have not been here. Do not deny your pain or allow its trivialization. You must grieve it to the bitter bottom, the dregs, the margins of life where you will totter at the edge of the void. This is the only exorcism. Suffering has no solution, but given time, far more than the untouched imagine, it can be moved through. Others have. You might. Eventually, blessing may embrace the wound. And this last one is called Mourning. It's a lot of these poems you'll hear expressions from southern West Virginia, and this is called Mourning. The old folks call it wearing the willow. I think of a great green droop of foliage, slackness blowing in the wind, whipping empty air. Loss exposes inner space for unknown something new, but only after long homesickness for what will not return. The willow chooses to sink its roots in water, which I think is a hopeful image. I hope is a hopeful image. So the fashion in poetry these days tends to be for rather long, very free verse, and sometimes using language for which my mother would have reached for the bar of ivory soap. Au contraire, I like and lean towards shorter poems, lyrics, and I like the poem to have some sort of structure where whether it's a series of stanzas with the same number of lines or a meter, ba-bump, 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 that I hope isn't intrusive, but is certainly there. Sneaky little rhymes. I like internal rhyme where, a couple of words will rhyme with each other, that sort of thing. Many of you already know that a lot of my poetry is about place, both external place and interior geography, and how one often reflects the other for us. Sometimes I think when we turn our eyes outward and shift our focus from self to other, or from self to the landscape, paradoxically, we learn things about ourselves by doing that. It's why community is important in a kind of ruggedly individualistic country like we live in. Our communities, for good or ill, can take us outside ourselves. So I noticed a couple of years ago that for years I've written short poems with one kind of revelatory idea in them. And they weren't sonnets, but they might have been the subconscious desire of somebody who is addicted to the sonnets of Shakespeare and John Donne and Gerard Manley Hopkins, because what I also noticed was that these poems all had 14 lines. And I didn't set out to do it. I just kind of went back, doubled back, and noticed it. Some of you, at least Mark, will remember Thrall, Hibbard, and Holman, A Handbook to Literature, which was the English major's Bible at Bethany College when I was there. And I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. You can guess with this hair color. Thrall, Hibbard, and Holman defines a poem, a sonnet, as a lyric poem of 14 lines, highly arbitrary in form. Now, are there other English majors here? Oh, brave woman. Some of you will remember then that there are kind of two forms of sonnets, the Italian or the Petrarchan sonnet, which has the Italian sonnet, which has an octave and a sestet, 8 lines and 6 lines, and then the English sonnet, which has basically 3 quatrains and a couplet, so 3 4-lines and a couplet at the end. And real sonnets have 10 lines of iambic pentameter, ba-bum, 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 ba-bum. And these sequences of sonnets, several sonnets on the same topic, are absolutely wonderful, magical. If you can write good sonnets, it's a very exacting form. I'm no good at it. And that's why the poems in this book, from which I'm primarily reading, are called not sonnets, because they're primarily about getting an idea into 14 lines of varied lengths and varied meters. And you can't see it, of course, but in the book, they're 4, 4, and 2, or 8 and 6, or, The idea here is that we're going to be very gently introduced first to home, and then I'm going to read a few poems about a year, beginning in September, and then a few poems about the last journey toward which all of us are moving, whether we like to pay attention to it or not. And I want to point out to you the wonderful cover of Not Sonnets. The artist who conceived the cover is an Englishman called Adam Craig. And he designed the cover of the book with all of the seasons of the year on the same tree, which I just think is wonderful. That was his idea after he'd read the text of the sonnets. So I just want to lift his work up to you because I think it's just a wonderful image. All right, so a few poems about home, beginning with a poem entitled Receiving Place. Place does not normally give what one does not seek. Receiving its gift requires just being there, listening into silence, watching, waiting, like an osprey for fish, like her chicks for supper, like the thirsty sage for evening storm, the great boulders for lightning shattering strike. Knowing place requires being broken open. The next poem is called Returning, and I think about going back to the same place over and over again. And I have a brother who'd say, boring. And I don't think so. I think there's something wonderful about going back to the same place again and again. And so there's a little subscript under the title, and it's from the prophet Isaiah. In returning and rest ye shall be saved. Perhaps not immutable, place is inexhaustible. Returning to known ones does not diminish them or make them go dark, but more luminous. One sees what shines through the surfaces, notices more deeply details that are the pulse of the place. Returning, one migrates from large to small, attends to minuter things, passes into places infinity. Belonging is the last of the home poems I'm going to read. And I start this way because I want to challenge you to kind of do what this book has done. It's subtitled Observations from an Ordinary Life. And I think everybody's ordinary life is full of beauty and insight if we just sort of turn off all the stuff and shut up and pay attention to it. So this is called Belonging. I am an interested observer. You'll know the place, Carol. I'm an interested observer along the ridge I drive every Sunday morning. She lives on that ridge, so I thought I better, before she starts guessing, I better tell her, right? I'm an interested observer along the ridge I drive every Sunday morning. Over the years, I watched a house sink into itself. The yard went untended, and then the windows were broken. Vines snaked ominously in. The roof collapsed, and soon the walls followed. Oddly, the process of decay exuded the comfort of a truth. Earth reclaims her own, and I belong to the earth. It's that house just as you come out of West Liberty on the left-hand side. You know the one. It was a real nice house, and then all of a sudden it just wasn't. That's okay. You've been seeing my Adam's apple all this time? Okay, well, I start my book going through the year with autumn because autumn is the first part of the year for people who are teachers. And I know a lot of you are teachers, so we think of a year that begins really in September or late August and then moves through the year. So these are poems about the fall, and so they're also about dying and harvest. And you'll see as we go through that each of the seasons is sort of an image of something else. So the first poem is called What Sustains. Extraordinary autumn's late afternoon sun turns the ground golden. Bronze feathers illuminated a flock of wild turkeys gleaming in the stubble of field corn recently cut for silage. When something or someone seems already over, finished, what might sustain might be hidden in previously harvested places. The fallowness of fall. The life, it has a word in it that you might not recognize. The word is bespoke. It's an English word, and it means tailor-made, made for one person, not right off the rack. Okay, so that do that. The life of the Spirit is never one size fits all, never mass produced, but natural processes, a bespoke God continues to craft atoms and asters, bacteria and biospheres, chickens and children, is resident if hidden in individuated things. How else could the fallowness of fall be the gestation of greening? So, dying isn't all that bad. I'll come back to this theme again and again. This one is called Funeral Procession, and we still around here in Brooke County, in Ohio County, across the river in Ohio, if there's a funeral cortege coming down the road, we stop for it, right? We should. That's the right thing to do. And this also has a funny word in it. It's a crocodile. A crocodile is a line of people or a list of things. In British schools, the children go out in crocodiles. They're long lines holding hands with each other. It's just such a weird word. I had to use it. But this is called funeral procession. In places sophisticated people think of as backwater. That's us. We aren't. In places sophisticated people think of as backwater, we still respect the dead. I stop at a crossroads for the crocodile of cars snaking toward the cemetery. It gives me time to attend to the feathery, rusty gray of late autumn's forest, the contours of leafless land. The dying time of year also deserves our respect for the life that will arise from its patient waiting. So after autumn, we come to winter, which is the season of death. Dum, da, dum, dum. Except that we gardeners know it's not true at all. All the stuff that our gardens are full of right now and are so gloriously beautiful, it's all because of winter. So when nothing seems to be happening, maybe we need to pay a little closer attention, be a little bit more attentive. Gardens know better. This is a poem called Winter Twilight. It gets dark earlier in the winter. I kind of like that. I kind of miss it when it's still light at 9 o'clock. I feel sluggy because I'm ready for my pajamas at that point. All right. Winter Twilight. The temperature dropped suddenly. A slow, steady wind blew minute snowflakes in the frozen dusk. Tiny reminders we all live on the boundary between light and dark, between matter and air. A chill in the bones hisses, "You will die." "And be healed," whispers the rising evening star. Hibernation. As night grows colder, longer, like other insignificant mammals, I seek warmth where it is found. Pull the pillow from the top and the blanket from the bottom and curl up in the bed's center, perhaps seeking to avoid the tedium and rigor of another ordinary day. Perhaps waiting for light, for danger's darkness to pass. Perhaps hoping the heart will again be strong enough to leave its hibernation. You know, if you want to hear a poem again, you could just holler out again. Because poetic language is very dense, and you may want to do that. And I meant to say that earlier, but I get nervous and I forget the stuff I'm supposed to say if I don't have it all written out on little pieces of papers. This one is called Ill-Timed. Today, at absolutely the wrong time of year, start again. Today, at absolutely the wrong time of year for their migration, I saw a phalanx of Canada geese tearing across the sky like ominous bombers in World War II newsreels. Are they disordered, lost, left behind by their more timely, better organized cohorts? It is always, everywhere, the wrong time for bombers. This one is called A Solitary Snowdrop Blooming. It's the first thing that comes up in my garden, solitary snowdrop blooming. We endured an Arctic freeze. Now mounded snow melts in welcome sun. For reasons unintelligible and unexpected, unseasonable reprieve is reminiscent of the piety of unbelievers who suddenly pray in danger on deathbed, find themselves helped, healed, delivered, stupefied, as surprised as this solitary snowdrop blooming in winter. Not bored yet? Okay, let me wet my whistle for just a little bit again. And we get to spring and summer, a little bit more cheerful. Spring is the time of new growth. It's not surprising that the big religious holidays of all the big religions, like Christianity and Judaism and the big religions, have their most important, most life-giving and happy feasts in the springtime. It's a season of hope, and it's a process not to be hurried, and that's the title of this poem, A Process Not to Be Hurried. Long solitude is a gradual drawing inward. It sounds like COVID already, doesn't it? Long solitude is a gradual drawing inward, going deeper, like autumn planted bulbs, snuggling into the soil, marinating in darkness to flower in spring. I love that line. I'm sorry, but I just love that I thought of marinating in darkness. Snuggling into the soil, marinating in darkness to flower in spring. When the isolation ends and blossoming is invited, do not hurry the process. First, the shy green shoot, then the tentative tip of a fragile stalk arises to carry a bud opening slowly in its own time. I think people are like that too. This is a poem I wrote in the parking lot of the Farm and Fleet down in Elm Grove. I tell you what, Wheeling is full of places to find poems. It's called Considering Seeds, okay? Imagine it. Farm and Fleet, Respects at the other end of the parking lot. You with me? All right. I parked my battered Subaru amidst the pickup trucks. Now stand gaping at racks of envelopes of seeds, each with a colorful picture of a perfect vegetable which I shall never achieve. I want to plant them all. Strive to be realistic about my tiny plot's possibilities. It is cold late April with frost most mornings, It is far too early to plant, but never too early to hope. This is called This Gentler Way, This Gentler Way. I am enamored of early morning's slow dawning. I'm a morning person. I like to be up early in the morning. I am enamored of early morning's slow dawning, which reveals things obscured by day's full brightness. The gradual appearance of shadowy things about self and others, which in harsher light might involve judgment. Illuminated this gentler way evokes understanding, mercy's back door that might open into love. I'm an NPR person, and one of my favorite programs is Stardate. Remember, it used to be called something else, but now it's Stardate. And I feel like Billy Henry is a good friend of mine. That's the announcer on that program. And he tells me all kinds of stuff about astronomy, about which I know nothing, or science in general, about which, as you probably know, I know nothing. So this is, although he's not here, this is in honor of Billy Henry and NPR's program Stardate, and it's called Something Might Be. National Public Radio's announcer said that astronomers think the thrumming in space might be leftover bits of electromagnetic energy. Something is certainly pulsing through the universe. It might, in fact, be pulsars, but it might be something else. Something entirely different, something less impassive, say an enormous infusion of incorporeal, pervasive, promiscuous love. That's about the closest I'll get to a God poem. So, summertime, growth, fruition. Tomorrow is officially summertime, right? We have Memorial Day and the Feast of Our Lady and St. Elizabeth, and Woman's Feast today. Yes. I looked, I don't have a poem on the Visitation, or I'd have read it today. But this is summer, and these are a few summer poems. Different orientation. I listen in early morning to that gentlest of sounds, a quiet summer rain. It brings invitation to green things to grow, offers the possibility of a different orientation, to receive what is given, to enter the seed's mystery which grows as it will, content to wait in earth for heaven's summons, which might be heard in the dawn bird's warble. So, dawn, evening. Jump through a day here. A trick of the light. Late afternoon sun on a sycamore tree. My house has got sycamore trees all the way around it. It makes me sneeze like the dickens in the springtime. Late afternoon sun on a sycamore tree creates an artist's study in shades of green. The layered texture of leaves quivers in a faint breeze, or perhaps a gentle breath. Once again, I sense that something more real stands behind this world, which is animate in it, offers constant invitation to love what is here for the sake of that other. I want to read that again because I think it's an important idea, if I do say so myself. All right, it's called A Trick of the Light, and I think it's always been the case that there's been something beyond this for me, especially in the natural world. That's why I live out in kind of in a boondocky kind of place, and I don't have a lawn. I don't want a lawn. I want a wild mess around the house. The late afternoon sun on a sycamore tree creates an artist's study in shades of green. The layered texture of leaves quivers in a faint breeze or perhaps a gentle breath. Once again, I sense that something more real stands behind this world, which is animate in it, offers constant invitation to love what is here for the sake of that other. This is called garnering, and it's transition from summer to autumn. I mean, we have to make the cycle. That's how it all works. Garnering. Crops are planted in long ribbons around the hills. Unfurl, brown, green, fallow, furrowed, fecund. Isn't that nice? Unfurled, brown, green, fallow, furrowed, fecund. Wide swaths of knee-high corn undulate under the wind's hand. Like all things, move inexorably toward inevitable harvest. One of the reasons I think we have to pay attention to places is because they're cyclical. You know, they have beginnings and middles and ends and beginnings again. And this is really, I think, an important thing that we lose if we get too far away from natural life, if we walk on concrete too much and not enough on grass. So there's always, to me, something slightly melancholy about summer when I look through my oeuvre, my works of poetry. I find that there are more fall and winter poems always than there are summer poems. And I think because I know what comes next. School. I hated it as a kid. And so when it got to be summer, I could hardly enjoy it because I knew I was going to go back to school. What? The end of the garden, or just the end, capital E. So I want to read just 3 poems on ending, and then we'll have a little time for conversation if you want to ask any questions. And then I have a final poem that I'll close with. But these are poems about final journeys. I know it's going to be a really shocking revelation to you, but you are not immortal. I know, take a deep breath. Part of the reason that the cyclical nature of things is so important is because I think that's true of us too. So this poem is called, what is this poem called? It is called Late Life Hope. Late Life Hope. In fact, there are 2 poems, and these are kind of a set. They go together, and they have to do with suddenly realizing you aren't young. Bummer. Except it isn't. Except it isn't. Late life hope. Moving into life's winter, I watch companions of youth and middle age begin to drop away like autumn's slow demise. The flowers finish. Bowheads drop blossoms. According to their natures, trees turn rusty or bright. Daylight dims, darkness deepens as forests become skeletal. Surely the roots go deeper, draw sustenance from sources mysterious and unknown. So I think the other thing that I do, and I don't know whether men do this or other women do this, but I'm really aware of the women who have formed my life. Certainly my mother, but I think about school teachers, and particularly a group of wonderful women in the parish I belong to as a graduate student. I wanted to be them when I grew up. You know, they were that kind of woman. And this is a poem called Role Reversal. Role reversal. You realize those you admired, the women you wanted to be when you grew up, are all gone, have crossed the threshold into whatever service comes next for role models of compassion. Have crossed the threshold into whatever service comes next for role models of compassion. Nobody is ahead of you in line. Your heart lurches wildly, knowing you are the grown-up. Nobody consoles or comforts you, puts Band-Aids on your brokenness. Just as it once was for them, this lonely and terrifying task is now yours to do for others. I think that's another kind of cyclical nature of things, that we, if we're lucky, we have mentors and people who loved us and brought us along when we were children, and then it's very shocking. You look around and suddenly, you know, you're the first one in line. There's nobody ahead of you. And this is a poem called Choice, and it's really sort of the only explicitly Christian poem in the lot, but I wanted to read one. So this is called Choice. To bring them healing, Moses put a bronze snake on a pole, forced the people to gaze on the horror that bit them. Christ himself preferred the cup to pass by, but drank it to the bitter dregs. To make the torment disappear, one old desert monk thrust his head in the demon's mouth. Not by evasion, but by choosing the thing most feared. Move through it into freedom. Move through it into life. So I'm willing to entertain questions, comments. Please don't throw anything. I just assume not dodge stuff. But yes, ma'am.
I have a question on your process, because you have some very intriguing ideas, but how you form them into your not sonnet. So I imagine there's no one way that you formulate your not sonnet, but you start with your idea and then kind of start rearranging words and make it flow.
Yeah, that's a really kind of fun question, because I don't think very often about the process. Poems usually start for me with something I see, oddly enough, because I'm very hard of hearing. I'm hearing impaired. So although I would love to write poems about music, I've kind of lost that ability now. But something I see, or just a phrase, often reading somebody else's poetry, or reading somebody, a writer that I like, or a phrase in a novel. It's like a hook. You know, it hooks me, and I think, oh, that's interesting. And so every place in my house are little pieces of paper and stubs of pencil, because one of the other things about being old is I won't remember it from the kitchen to the study. So I've got to have little pieces of paper everywhere to like jot down the idea. And then the poem sort of hatches from the idea as a general rule. And I try to think, great ideas are trite. The great ideas are the ones everybody's always had, right? I mean, they're not new, but but the job, I think, for a poet or maybe for a preacher, for a writer, for a parent, is to take that universal truth. We used to call them UTs when I was in graduate school. One UT is if the toast falls on the ground, it will fall butter down, that kind of thing. I mean, there are these useful ideas that we all share in all the cultures. And then what the poet, I think, has to do is to figure out how to make the language around it new so that we can recognize it again. Does that make sense to you, Mark? Does that make sense to you? You have to go yes, no, maybe. Okay. He's sitting back there looking very mysterious behind his mask.
The same kind of thing that we were talking about, the swans.
The geese, yes, exactly. The image of the geese. So I get an idea hooks me, something I see. That's one of the reasons I like where I live, because I can wander up in the woods and I grow stuff, sort of, live with the mammals and things on the hill. And then that usually, as I think about it, suggests some common wisdom that isn't like new. But the job then becomes, now how can I make this poem say something that people will recognize, but they'll recognize it because they're seeing it in a new way. Does that make sense at all? It's like, let me just give you two quick examples. I read that article in the New York Times on that village in the Ukraine that were willing to destroy their homes and their crops to save themselves and a bigger place. And I thought, that's, for me as a Christian, that's Christianity in a nutshell. Pardon me?
Sacrifice.
It is sacrifice. It's self-giving. And so I thought about that, and then I kind of made the poem out of it. Or that image about it's always, it's never the right time for a bomber, that poem with the geese. I actually saw a picture in an old magazine of the end of the Second World War, and they had made a party for children, and the children were all on trestle tables in the middle of the street, and they had paper hats and whatever. And it was such a picture of it's over, thank God, And then I thought, well, yeah, any kind of war is awful, and it's always thank God when it's over. And then that image of the geese triggered the image, those pictures you see in the newsreels of the bombers either coming to bomb England or going to bomb Europe, whatever. That's how that happened. Does that help you at all?
Yeah.
I would say keep paper and pencil nearby if you're interested in writing, and don't give up on editing either. A lot of these poems are the result of many drafts, And I find that the shorter the poem is, the fewer words it has, the better it is. So when I'm editing, I edit out. And I take away all the extraneous language, sort of one of the last stages for me in writing is to take out everything that's extraneous. To go for words that will carry the weight of what you want to say, so you don't have to have 15 adjectives. Take them out, find the nub of the thing. Yes. Yes,
Might help you out. Since I have
Can you speak up, please? I'm very hard of hearing. I'll come. Sorry, I'll come a little closer, but I won't breathe on it.
No, I'll be texting. I'm sorry.
It was an idea you were going to throw out.
Something that's going to help me, you said, something that might need help.
Yeah, okay. Instead of, I used to do the pieces of paper all the time, little things, and since I got a smartphone, I text myself now if I have an idea. That might help.
You're talking to the wrong girl. I don't watch television. I have my first smartphone, which I don't know how to use. Honest to gosh, I don't know how to use. They said, can we download your apps? And I said, what? I'm sorry, I drink tea because I can't work a coffee pot. I mean, you laugh, I'm not kidding. I am hopeless. And it's a wonderful idea for people who know how to do that. I'm not one of them.
I have friends that exactly like you.
Oh, good.
So you're not alone.
Yes, sir.
Bonnie, that was my reaction to what she said. By the time I get to where it is, to do the text, get the first couple of words in, I've lost it.
Yeah, I just, you know.
The capital paper, that's.
Yeah, I mean, it's hopeless of me. I realize that part of the reason I feel so bummed out about being old and getting older is that I didn't keep up, and that's not good. Well, yeah, say something.
You were talking about the ridge, and from my family, they used to live up West Liberty.
Yeah,
They had a farm up there.
yeah, so did my greats up in Brooke County.
And is the ridge apple pie ridge?
Yes, it was.
And I remember that from my family. And they had a farm. We went up there last time my uncle, and he was my father's younger brother.
Mhm.
Last time we were up there, everything was grown, and we could barely see. And all we could see was foliage.
Yeah,
And it was like, oh, it's gone, but in a sense it's not.
well, you know, the earth takes back what belongs to her. I mean, I think that's comforting. I don't find that. I mean, I might not find it so comforting 15 years from now if I'm still here, but you know, yeah, the earth does take care of itself if it isn't interfered with. The problem is we've interfered so badly with natural processes. We just have. Could we just see if there's anybody who hasn't had a chance to? Yes, please, because I don't want us to keep over
I
time.
understand, but I just want to say how your reading brought your poems to life. It was much, because I'm not a big poetry reader, but listening to you was marvelous.
Thank you.
So,
Amen.
Yes.
Yes, thank you. You know, I'm a good teacher and I'm a good preacher and I'm a good reader of poetry, and it's a gift because I'm an off the scale introvert. I really don't like being in front of people. I don't like going to parties. You could almost get me to a dinner party if there are only 2 other people there. I mean, I just, you know, all of that is just really hard for me. But there's something about living in the language. I don't know how else to say it. But I have always been a reader from the time I was little. And there's just something about language that's really alive for me and comforting and challenging and sometimes makes me really mad, you know, all of that sort of thing. But thank you. That's very kind of you all to say so. And, I mean, I work hard on it too. It's, you know, you don't just sort of get up and I'm not a last minute person or a person who's very good at ad-libbing. So I really do have it all written down quickly. And then I want to read one more poem and give Sean a chance to tell us anything he'd like to tell us at this point.
How do you feel about Saturday nights when you have to get up early on Sundays and
Do you know,
go to church?
I don't do anything on Saturday nights as a general rule. And I was married to a preacher, so Sunday was a work day, so to speak. So we didn't much do anything. You know, I didn't go to parties or things. But you know what? It doesn't bother me. I love Sunday morning. Remember that song, Come Sunday Morning? What musical is that from? It's the African American. Is it Porgy and Bess? I can't remember the musical that it's from, but it's that wonderful song about, you know, we live towards Sunday morning, you know. I love Sunday morning. I really do. Even if I cut church, I love Sunday morning. Sometimes I love it more when I don't go. Sometimes I go up and stomp around on the hill. The wonderful poet Wendell Berry, and I commend to you Wendell Berry if you haven't read his work. He for years went out on his farm on Sunday morning and wrote a poem on Sunday mornings. And they're collected in one of the volumes of his poetry. And I highly recommend them to you. They are, Wendell Berry, Kentucky poet, wonderful writer, novelist, very strong voice for ecological farming and ecology, and a terrific poet. But, he did that. I don't know, I hated Sunday when I was a kid because we had to wear these awful clothes to church. These dresses with these big crunchy skirts and hats. We had to wear something on your head. Do you remember all that? That almost put me off religion altogether. And that was awful, but it got better as I got older. Well, thank you for coming on a beautiful day, coming in to hear some poems. And I'll close with a poem called In Life's Gloaming. Gloaming is the word in Scotland where they have the long, slow movement from light to darkness. And it's not evening, it's another whole kind of way of reckoning time. And this is called In Life's Gloaming, and it has a superscription from Sappho. Yes, that's Sappho. O evening, you bring home all that bright dawn has scattered. I wish I'd written that line. O evening, you bring home all that bright dawn has scattered. That's from Sappho's poem, The Evening Star. Cows of conscience come home. Chickens of confusion roost. The hard edges of things fade. Light lengthens, wanes in the west. Songs of small birds modulate toward the owl's ominous hoot. Creatures of the night creep about their nocturnal business. The wise lessen the urge to assert. Kindness overcomes judgment. Tolerance ascends the heart's throne. And we go to our rest in peace. Lay down, awaiting with assurance the dawn of the new day. You're most welcome. Most welcome.
Thank you.
He's signaling that he